live. Welcome back to the On 3 podcast, everyone. I got myself, Salvi, doing take 2. I got my co-host and my brother Naveed with me. And Naveed, who do we have with us today?
Austin, welcome to the pod.
Appreciate it.
Yes, we're going to do things a bit differently today. Instead of me going over all the things that I know about you and introducing you, I'm going to give you the floor. But before I do that, I just want to know, Austin, how does a 28-year-old own over 20 rental properties in the GTA?
I guess we're going to get into that in today's episode. Do we want to?
Just get right into it.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, so I guess, it all started with one property, right? When I got started, actually, why don't I give some background into myself? I want to make it clear because most people are probably going to say that I probably came from rich parents and they funded me. That is so far from the truth. My parents were actually both born in India. They were both born in poverty. My dad dropped out of school in grade 6 to support his grandma. So we did not come from a wealthy background at all. So when we came to Canada, or when they came to Canada and they had me, they grinded. I'm sure it's the same thing for your parents, right? Hustling, working multiple jobs, putting food on the table. And they really wanted me to do well in school. And I was because we didn't have a lot, I was I want to be a doctor, I want to be a dentist, I want to try to make as much money as possible. Went into sciences, didn't like it, was doing good in business, so I thought to myself, why don't I just specialize in business, right? I'm getting good grades at it. I don't know what career paths there are, but we'll see where it leads. Mm-hmm. Then I started working audit. Yeah, so similar to you guys, I know you studied in business as well. Every one of my jobs got progressively better. I just didn't like the lifestyle that corporate, sort of provided. Waking up early, working, coming back, commuting, and then getting home by 7 p.m. It felt like a rat race almost, so I needed to do something totally different. And that led me to buy my first investment property. And it was not in Toronto, let's make that clear. I had about $45,000 saved, and this was 2018. You can't buy anything surrounding the GTA at that point. So I was looking, most people, I want to invest in real estate. Let me invest in my backyard. Reality is most people can't afford Toronto, right? So I started thinking, where else could I buy properties? And I found one of the most affordable cities that was within my budget was Windsor. And at that time, everyone's do not touch that place with a 10-foot pole because it's it has a bad reputation, industrialized straight across Detroit. But I was fuck it, let me do my own thing, right? So I decided to just jump into investing there. And admittedly, I didn't do things right. So first thing is that I knew very little about real estate. Second thing is that, do you guys know what a listing realtor and a buying realtor is?
Yep.
I didn't know what that was, right? So I was just on realtor.ca looking at different listings. I saw a listing I liked and I called the listing realtor, right? I had no buying realtor. I didn't know the difference between the two. And the listing realtor doesn't always look for your best interest. They're representing the seller, not you as the buyer, right? So they told me this property sold, come down in Windsor and I'll show you other properties. All right. Yeah. So, So that weekend, me and my dad booked a trip down. And because my dad's a handyman, I was hoping that he'd be able to sort of tell things of what's good and bad about a property. He wasn't. But the realtor took us to 5 properties and basically ended off the day saying, which property do you want to buy? I was I guess I gotta, this poor lady took an entire day from her schedule. I guess I gotta buy something. It was not well thought out. And I bought the most affordable thing. And it was $130,000 single family home that I thought only needed paint, but turns out it needed a lot more. But that was sort of, I know I didn't really answer your question of the 20 properties, but just to give some background, that was sort of the start of it. It was not clean. It was a super messy situation. I don't know if you I can continue on, dude. I can keep on going on tangents.
But okay, what did you see in Windsor in 2018 though? There must have been something.
I'd be lying. So I'll tell you this. Now when I choose a market, I'm very detail oriented. I look at population growth, economics. I look at vacancy rates. I look at rent rolls, prices, the type of jobs, the type of employment, if it's diversified or not. Back then, I didn't. I just saw I could get a house for less than $200,000. I could afford this. Let me buy something. Like, it's not the way that you should traditionally go in terms of choosing a market. But I was very eager, right? Like, I was driven because I didn't want to work corporate. So I was like, I saw an opportunity in real estate. Like, let me dive into it. My only thing is that I needed to be able to afford it. 2, I didn't want to borrow money from my parents because they're like blue collar. Like, I just felt bad to take money. And then 3, it needed to be cash flow positive, meaning that the rent needed to cover all of the expenses, not just the mortgage, the insurance, the vacancy rates, the maintenance, the utilities. It needs to cover everything plus have some extra money. Because like that was my game plan, is to get rental properties to eventually retire off of. But yeah, that was like basically the story of the first property. It was a disaster. I had to take vacation days. I had to do some renos. Like it ended up panning out well at the end of the day, but it was not smooth sailing.
Gotcha. So to now, I think we've kept people in suspense a little bit. To give your bio to people, you are Austin.
I totally forgot about that. Right.
Austin, and I'll read your LinkedIn headline.
Yeah.
8-figure portfolio real estate investor, mortgage agent, and financing expert, podcast host, entrepreneur, founder of real estate community with 7.3 thousand plus members. So you're doing a lot.
Yes.
Admittedly. And you've had a lot of articles written about you. You've been on podcasts. You have a whole social media brand. And we're going to get into all that. But yeah, thank you for coming on the podcast, first of all. And we kind of want to give people a taste of what they can expect when tuning into this episode. So in saying that, we talked about how you got into Windsor and you started investing right then and there. But let's take it even further back from there. You were mentioning to us you grew up in Scarborough, similar place to where we came from. Immigrant family, obviously, kind of similar struggles that a lot of immigrants go through. And what I've understood is, and I think a lot of immigrant kids kind of go through that, is that early struggle plays a lot into our philosophy about wealth, our attitude towards money.
Yeah.
And our overall drive and ambition. And you've kind of talked about this, so would love for you to talk about it here as well. What was the struggle like, and how did that inform your decision to go about wealth?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not like we're poor or anything. I want to make that clear. Yeah. I think part of it is that I didn't know that we didn't come from money because, you're surrounded by other people in the area and the neighborhood. Everything is normalized. But things that I started noticing different is, I guess, either when you go to high school or even university was a little bit more eye-opening on different lifestyles that people sort of lived. When I was growing up, we didn't first and foremost, we always went shopping for like the cheapest things that you can find, like grocery shopping, like coupon picking. I realized that that's not a normal thing, right? I didn't realize
that's pretty normal for brown people and Asians.
I guess so. Yeah, maybe it's a cultural thing. Maybe it has nothing to do with money. But yeah, like that was a big thing. And then my parents also, like, my dad, he stopped working to take care of us. So like we're really a single income household. So we didn't get everything that we wanted, like I was far from spoiled, and I wanted a lot of things as a kid. And to get things that I wanted, I had to save my own money. I had to work to get it, right? Nothing was bought for me. And so that's why money became a big thing. It's like the more I earned, the more I could afford things that I liked, the more that I could afford fancy things, nice things. I realized that's also not sort of the life I want to go down, buying a bunch of nice things. I had a phase in life where I was buying like a bunch of designer shit. And now I do not wear any of it. It was a very cringy moment of my life. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I mean, you're pretty well dressed right now. That's all it
thanks.
takes.
It's Uniqlo.
Same here, bro.
Nice. Yeah.
I was just gonna say same.
Was it Uniqlo Alta or whatever it's called? Yeah. Sorry, you were saying.
No. Yeah, I hope that answered the question. Like growing up, I think it did make an impact, right? Like just being hard work driven, my parents putting an emphasis on grades. And as a result, they laid that lifestyle for me. It's like, you got to get good grades, you got to get a good job, and you will live a fruitful life. I got good grades. I got like pretty decent jobs. I didn't like where life was headed down, right? So like I needed to pivot and change. But had they not laid that out for me, maybe I wouldn't have known that, like there's other avenues to make money.
Makes sense. So I've also heard we've done our research on you, obviously. And I seen one thing that inspired you was Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yes.
what was the author's name? Robert
Kiyosaki.
Kiyosaki.
Yeah.
There you go. I haven't read the book, but talk about what that taught you and how that led you to your path.
Yeah, so I will say that it was a mindset shift, right? I think all of us coming from business, we're thought to think from a rational point of view. How do you minimize losses? Like this investment thesis makes sense. I think I needed a mindset shift because when first looking into real estate, I felt like it was too much risk. Read that book, and it showed the difference between how wealthy people think and how quote-unquote rich people think. Rich people meaning you earn a high income, but you don't necessarily have a lot of wealth. You spend a lot of that income on nice things like the designer things, the nice cars that are not going to build you wealth in the long term. Wealthy people take their money, invest it into assets, and those assets generate more income for them. Right? They take that income and invest it into more assets until they grow a base of assets so large that it generates enough income for them to live off of. So again, like it was sort of a shift instead of buying all of these nice things, like to invest into property. It didn't really help me on the technical side of things. It just helped me think bigger. And I think for a lot of people, they can get a lot from that book in shifting mindset because that's where it all starts at the end of the day.
I haven't read that one, but there are other books. One that they tease me about reading all the time is called Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good one. They say I do the most of the thinking, not the growing.
Yeah, you got to get into the other aspects of the book too.
But yeah, those books are definitely helpful to have that mindset shift. And I think until I can speak for us because we didn't come from like a high net worth family per se, you don't get to see that realm of like how things are done until you actually meet people who are wealthy in that way, or I guess read books or are around people. And I think I'm definitely gonna have to check that one out. So after undergrad, you were in finance, I think,
right?
You were working at a bank.
After graduating, at a bank.
And are you still working at a bank? No, you're doing something else now.
Yeah, so I've actually left the full-time gig. I left it in 2021, February, just around the COVID time. So, I mean, just to catch you up to speed there, I was buying rental properties at that time. So I was buying, and I think Jelani talked about this too. I was buying properties, I was renovating it, and then I was refinancing my money out. So it's like called the BRRRR strategy in real estate, right?
Yeah.
So buying, renovating, refinancing, taking that money and buying another property. So at that point, I had a couple properties under my belt, but you can't live off of cash flow because the issue is that a roof goes down and then all of your cash flow is eroded, right? I started seeing that as I was scaling my portfolio, and I was like, if I want to leave my full-time job, I need to sort of shift gears, right? The portfolio is great for wealth building. It's not great to live off of income-wise. So then I started looking at like what other synergies in real estate can I profit off of? And a big thing in the BRRRR strategy, right, buying is the first step. And you got to buy discounted properties. You just can't go on the MLS and buy a deal and be like, I'm going to renovate it and refinance. No, you got to buy a property that's under market value, right? And I was good at the deal sourcing part. I was always networking. I was always heading down to Windsor and networking with owners, other real estate investors, and I was getting connected with different deals. So like, instead of closing these deals myself, I could get them under contract saying that I'm going to buy them. And instead of closing it myself, I can give it to another investor and collect a fee, like being a middleman, right? So, like pre-condo assignments, right? Yeah. It's the same thing, but for resale properties. Yeah. And it's called wholesaling in real estate. So I started doing that because I couldn't close on every property. And my first deal, I made $20,000 that way. And I was like, damn, my income at that time was about $70,000 a year at the bank. So I was like, this is a couple months of salary. So I started doing that more and then partnering with someone who's a little bit more experienced in that field. And we decided to build a business out of that. And when I saw that there was a clear path to earn income outside of my full-time gig, that's when I transitioned and just jumped feet first into real estate.
You mentioned you kind of got into real estate by investing in Windsor. Is that something you've always planned on doing? Or were you just looking at ways to get passive income, and then you kind of found that real estate to be the best one?
Yeah, it wasn't. So what I'll say is sort of order of operations. I first looked at something in Toronto. I was like, yeah, this doesn't really make sense and I can't afford it. So then I sort of gave up from there. I did a little bit of stock investing, right? So I was investing in weed stocks. at that time where it's about to be legalized.
Yeah.
Shout out Trudeau.
Yeah, right. I put it like I still remember the stock. It was a penny stock, TGIF, and I fucking
Oh,
lost.
man,
it.
I
I don't know why.
invested in that too.
I don't know why I've heard of that.
Yeah, because we're all in the same Reddit forum.
Yeah. Oh my God. I'm still holding on to some weed stocks. They have not done well for me.
Holding on to hope. Yeah,
Holding on to hope.
I lost a couple thousand doing that, and obviously
Yeah.
that wasn't very smart. So I was like, all right, like what am I going to do next? I think part of it is that you have this eagerness to make money quickly. And stocks are so liquid that if I don't make money quickly and the stock prices drop, I just exit out of it. Not very rational.
Yeah.
Real estate, you can't just exit out of it. You're forced to hold, right? So again, that led me to relook into real estate, read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and sort of jump down into that avenue.
Were there any scary moments? I know you talked about COVID being one. Yeah.
So scary moments. It's nonstop.
Yeah.
So I think first scary I can go like into a couple of them, and I'll go into the biggest one. First scary moment is that I bought a duplex in Windsor. My realtor told me it was a duplex. The listing says it was a duplex, and then it turns out it wasn't a duplex, right?
What?
So the city came and said that actually this is a single family home and the basement unit is illegal. But it's weird. There's 2 hydrometers, meaning like everything, all the utilities are separately metered between both of the units. So you would think that it's legal. And title insurance did not cover it. The lawyer said there's not much that I could do here, except I could try to sue the person that sold it to me. But it wasn't worth going down a lawsuit. So I ended up having to sink a lot of money to turn it to a legal duplex. So that involved like borrowing money from people because I didn't have the money at that time. That was a disaster situation. To get around from that, not to make that same mistake again, is you explicitly, maybe the lawyer I chose was shitty as well. I don't know. Your lawyer should catch it, but going forward, I explicitly tell my lawyer, I want you to do a search to make sure that it's legal. And I call the city as well now. I always call the city and be like, hey, I'm buying XYZ property. Is this what they're telling me it is, right? Because this mistake could cost you thousands of bucks. The biggest, there's 2 more I want to touch on. Like one of the biggest like issues is like I was buying in crappy locations, okay? Big part of the appeal, quote unquote, in buying crappy locations is the numbers look better on paper because your purchase price is so cheap. Yeah. The rents in crappy locations are not much discounted than prime locations. Maybe it's a couple $100 off, but your purchase price falls off of a cliff. So the numbers look better on paper, and I bought a 4-unit in one of the worst locations of Windsor. What ended up happening is that it basically the house went on fire. I got a call one day from my partner. It was 11 p.m. and I was like, "Why is this dude calling me? I'm not gonna pick up." Then he called me again. I was like, "This is odd, right? Why is someone calling me at 11 o'clock at night?" So I picked up and he said, "Hey, I got a call from the fire department. Your house went on fire." Immediately, I was like, "Holy crap! Like what?" First and foremost is, did anyone get hurt, right? Not much information was known. I woke up, Googled the house number, found a bunch of articles on it. And yeah, it was a disaster. Like the house was completely burnt down. And I was worried because I was like, is this something about the property that I could have prevented that led to this happening, right? Yeah. And turns out after a week that it was an arsonist. So like I know that there were a couple of sketchy people in that building that I inherited. I didn't put them in, it was inherited. So someone probably did something wrong to upset the guy and he lit the house on fire. Yeah, dude, and that's like what comes with these bad neighborhoods. When you think about it, during that entire time, I thought if this was something that was in my control, is it considered negligence on my end? And if it's negligence, this is like criminal. I could go to jail, right? For if something happened.
Stressful.
Dude, it was beyond stressful. So I was calling lawyers, trying to figure out what to do in that situation. I've never been put in that position before. But these are the things that could happen behind. This is obviously extreme, but it could happen behind the scenes that no one talks about, right? Yeah. Everyone likes to show the nice things on social media, but I could say like every single deal I did, I could probably tell you one horror story that happened behind the scenes that I had to like get over. So it's never smooth sailing. And that's with entrepreneur. It's not just real estate. It's with any sort of entrepreneurial journey, right?
For sure.
That's crazy. You talked about quote unquote finding houses that are, below market value. I feel like we all want to do that, right? But we just can't seem to find them. I saw that you have quote unquote resources where you provide listings that I think these are off market.
Yes.
Right? Under a certain value, or they're amazing deals. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so that's called wholesaling in real estate. Basically, again, the premise for the audience to just reiterate is that I find discounted off-market properties. Instead of closing it myself, I find another investor to take that contract. I get a fee in between, right? The more profitable the deal, the bigger the fee I collect. Basically, the entire premise of it is that, so 99% of sellers are better off listing with a realtor, right? There's that one, when it makes sense, even after you pay realtor fees. So you get the most exposure, you get multiple offers, that's the way to go. There's that 1% or like maybe 2% of sellers that, maybe listing on the MLS is not the best option. For example, let's say that your house is a hoarder house. Let's say that you're very embarrassed of the condition. We've seen houses where there's garbage stacked from like bottom to top. There's like urine smell. It's like it's sad to see like the condition that the properties get in. You don't want your family members to see that. You don't want to see your neighbors live in that sort of style of house. You want this to be as private of a transaction as possible. So these sellers are willing to trade equity, meaning they're willing to not take top market dollar because they have some sort of motivation to sell the property either quickly for cash or like, behind the scenes where it's not explicitly on the MLS. So those are the type of like sellers that we try to find. One of the deals that we're negotiating, so this one, it's a little bit of an odd situation. They're going through a separation. And because of them going through a separation, like they don't want to involve the realtor for whatever reason. I guess like the communication, like both of them don't get along. So for whatever reason, they don't want a third party to come in. They want a smooth transaction, headache free. So that's sort of where we step in, right? Also on top of that, because they're going through a separation, they need to sell this property first, get the money, and then they're going to be able to find another place to buy, right? That being said, most people, if you list on the MLS, you need to sell the house, then get the hell out of the house so someone can move in there, right? They want to stay in the house after selling it for 2 or 3 months, right? Yeah. No one's ever going to do that on the MLS. We're willing to do that. We're willing to take that risk where it's like, okay, we will keep you there for 3 months. And this is the risk is that if they're there for 3 months, they become tenants, technically, theoretically. After 30 days, they become tenants. Yeah. So they can stay there for a year, technically, before you can evict them, right? Yeah. So it's a huge risk, but you get it at a discounted price because they don't want, we asked them, why don't you move to an Airbnb? Why don't you rent another place and then find another place to buy? They're like, we're going through a separation. We don't want to move twice. This is too much headache, too much pressure. We just want to sell this, get our money, and then go our separate ways and find a place to buy. And so that's where we came in and we're able to provide that solution to them, right? In order to get these sort of deals, to answer your question, is you have to spend a lot of money in marketing. So like different advertising strategies that we do like those direct mailers. So we print out a bunch of mailers saying that we buy houses, that as is condition, etc. We mail it all across. We do that. We do digital advertisement, Facebook ads, Google ads, SEOs. You network with people. So think who looks at distressed properties? Contractors, foundation specialists. If you're looking at someone's foundation, that property's probably not in great condition. Yeah. Pest control, property managers, where you deal, property managers might deal with landlords who have tenants that are not paying, and those landlords are sick of those properties, right? You try to connect with anyone who touches, sees, and smells real estate. And you let them know, it's like, hey, look, I'm a buyer of real estate. If you have any opportunities, I'll give you a $2,000 referral fee as long as I'm able to close on the property. So there's different sort of unique creative strategies. The last thing I'll say is for your audience, because I know for most of your audience, it's probably not fix and flip, but maybe they want to buy a property to live in. Mm-hmm. How do you find a discounted property to live in? Because I've done that as well. There's a couple of ways. Like the most, I would say, underrated way that takes a lot of work, but people don't like to do is you find two things: expired listings on the MLS, right? So you can pull expired or canceled listings, and you try to reach out to them. It's a lot of cold calling and asking, hey, I saw this was listed a while ago. Are you still interested in selling it? They say, yes, I'm still interested in selling it. It's like, okay, what was the feedback? I mean, this thing was listed, like, why didn't it sell? Like, who walked through, what advice did they give you? And then you sort of gather that information, and then you can negotiate with them, right? Sorry, I look like you had something that you want to chime in.
Yeah. I'm just loving this.
I go on
I'm
tangents.
learning so much.
No, I was like, this is crazy insight that we've never got before.
Yeah, I've never actually thought about that. But interestingly, if just to provide, I guess, a bit of a tidbit on that, that's actually how my parents bought their investment property very recently. Like, not recently, I would say a few years ago, it was a similar case where the husband and wife got separated.
Right.
And the house was in complete trash condition. I remember going in there and I'm like, this is what we're buying? What's going on? It smelled everywhere. There was like probably food molding from like a year ago. It was terrible.
Smells like money.
Exactly. So they got it. They did a private deal, got it at a pretty good discount, and then obviously hired renovators to get it renovated. And it looks nothing like what they bought. But initially, when I saw it, I was like, "Yo, why are we going for this?" But obviously, it's a great strategy if you can pull it off properly. And but I wanted to like ask you, like, what's the risk in that? Because I remember when my parents were buying that, I'm like, "Man, that's risky. Like, what if there's like underlying issues here, or what if you can't update it to the point where it's like livable again?" Like, so I imagine there's a fair amount of risk in that.
Yeah. There's risk in everything. What I would say is that most things in real estate can be fixed within $5,000. You know, okay, now with inflation, let's say like $7,000. It needs a new roof, $7,000. It needs a furnace, $7,000. It needs like everything can be fixed with a cost. The biggest thing that should concern people, I would say, is structural issues, right? Structural issues is the problem where it can get into like the tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000 plus. Maybe it's not fixable, right? Yeah. As long as the house doesn't have structural issues, if you get it for a good enough price, you can justify the purchase. But that's the thing. You need to know what you're getting yourself into, right? Like, there are some things that you would never know, like electrical, for example. If the entire basement is drywalled, everything's drywalled, you don't necessarily always know what's behind those walls until you start taking it down. If you want to be conservative, you budget for it. Budget that you need to replace all of the electrical, right? So yes, everything has its risk, but risk comes with the price. You can mitigate it by getting things cheaper. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sense.
Not to put you on the spot, so fixer uppers,
Yeah.
overrated or underrated?
Fixer uppers? I want to say fixer uppers over. It depends on who you're speaking with. I think it's could be overrated. And I say this because a lot of people, especially during COVID, there's multiple offer on trash properties thinking like, I'm going to renovate this and sell this for a profit. And like that, to your point, is the risk, right? Yeah. It's like, you don't know how to run your numbers. Like, how you start is you start by figuring out what the maximum value of the property is. Like, what have comparables sold for? Don't project that it's going to be higher than comparables, right? And if you want to be conservative, take a discount to comparables. If comparables are going for $1 million, maybe you feel like you can sell it for $960 or $970. Then work backwards on your cost, right? Work backwards on your renovation costs. Work backwards on your realtor fees, because when you sell it, you're going to have to pay 5% commission plus HST. Work backwards on your land transfer tax, on your holding costs, because if it takes 6 months to sell, even if you think it's going to take 3 months to sell, assume it's going to take 6 months to sell. What are all the expenses you're going to incur during those 6 months? Private money, interest, utilities, insurance is expensive if it's vacant. Like, you got to work backwards on all of these costs and then have your profit margin, right? And for rental costs, you want to over budget, not under budget. So yeah.
Exactly. I'm sure you've seen this during the pandemic as well, but it was like everyone and their uncles just wanted to, they had that same strategy. Oh, I'm going to buy something that's undervalued, quote unquote. I'm going to fix it up and I'm going to sell it for profit. And I'm just looking at them, okay, is it that easy?
Yeah, they oversimplify. It's honestly, another risk is that the market turns and you could be shit out of luck if you're holding on. And I lost like $80,000 last year in a flip in Toronto. It was a house in Little Portugal. Do you guys know that area?
Yep.
This is like, Little Portugal's an A+ location.
Yeah,
you know,
near Ossington, right?
Yeah, near Ossington.
Yeah.
Near Ossington, Dundas and Dufferin. It's very hipster location.
Yeah.
near
That's where
Trinity
you spend
Bellwoods.
your weekends or Friday nights.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's prime location,
Yeah.
and I got something off market. I got it for $830,000 semi-detached house. Do you know what a vendor take back is, or have you guys heard about that term?
No.
Okay, so basically, when you buy a flip, you could buy it in cash. You're not supposed to get financing by the big banks. The big banks are not supposed to loan you money on flips. Some people lie to them, which you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so that was not an option for me. Or you can get private money, which is outrageous rates, or you can get a vendor take back, meaning that this particular seller owned the property in cash, right? He's an older gentleman. He had no mortgage on it. So I was like, hey, can you give me a loan on this property? I'm going to buy it from you. I'm like, do you need the cash? He's an older gentleman. He's like, I don't need the money like right now. It's not like I'm not buying anything. I was like, okay, can you loan me the money for this property? Right? Meaning that I'm going to give you down payment, and the rest of the purchase price, I'm giving you the mortgage payment. You're the bank, right? And why you do this is like qualification. I was self-employed. I probably wouldn't be able to qualify for that, right? So I don't need to qualify with this, right? It's fix and flip. So like he became the bank, and I negotiated the interest rate. At that point last year, interest rates were higher. I was giving him 3% in interest, so like very low as well. So $830,000. He loaned me 92% of the purchase price. So I only had to give 6%. Sorry, terrible math. 8% down.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the money that I would have put in down payment, 20%, if I went traditionally, I used that for renovations. I projected that I would sell this property semi-detached, right? I thought it was pretty conservative. I would be able to sell it for $1,050,000, right? Conservative, fully renovated top to bottom in this location. And we got the renovations done. I managed it. It was very lean renovations. It looked beautiful. Like no complaints on the quality of the finishes. The market turned. It was last year, sort of fall. That was when sales were the lowest in 20 years in Toronto, right? The market turned. I was struggling to get showings. And the vendor take back, which is the mortgage that he provided me, it was going to end like in 7 months. It was very short term. These are not long-term mortgages in a lot of situations. And so I was like, shit, like, dude, I got to sell this property. And I got to sell it like ASAP. So then I took a lowball offer. I sold this completely renovated semi-detached house for $950,000.
Oh wow, that's a deal for whoever got it.
Yeah. And they made a Toronto Life article about
Oh man.
I was like, fuck this. You know those I never posted this on my social media, so probably people didn't know. I was too ashamed to post it. But like, you know those articles where it's like, me and my husband make $200,000. We're searching for a house. Here are the 3 houses. We went with this house. You know those.
That was one of them.
One of them, and they bought it, and they explained what happened. I was like, fuck.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I was motivated. I was the motivated seller. I was like, let me just get rid of this. But that's a risk. The market turns, and you take a big loss, right?
So I was gonna ask you. You also. I'm assuming this might be your primary role, but you are also a mortgage agent. So
Yes.
how do you deal with the risk of these constant fluctuations with the economy and the interest rates?
Right. As a mortgage agent, that's a good question. Right now, I will say deal flow is a lot slower, and I deal primarily with investors. And it's tough because investors are either not taking too much action because the numbers don't make sense, or the investors that I'm dealing with have over-leveraged themselves. So it's now like repositioning to their portfolio. On the buyer side of things, like people buying a home, qualification is like very, very challenging right now. You're qualifying at prior, like when interest rates were very low, you're qualifying at 5.25%. Like that's the interest that you're qualifying for. Now you're qualifying at like 7.5, in some cases 8%. And that is a challenge for a lot of people, especially with where home prices are right now. I think you have to kind of, with the mortgage agent, one of the benefits is that you have different products for different people. So you can sort of shift your focus as the market changes. So one of the focuses I've been sort of pivoting towards are self-employed individuals, right? So self-employed individuals, they can get financing on the deposits that come in and out of their accounts. So a lot of self-employed individuals, they write off a ton of expenses and report very little to the CRA because they don't want to pay a ton in taxes. And they think that, now Scotiabank, BMO, RBC won't finance me, which is true in a lot of cases. They won't, but there are other financing solutions available to them, right? That look at it looks common sense. How much money went into your account? We know that you write off a bunch of personal shit, so we're not going to take that into account.
Yeah.
There are lenders that finance on that. So I'm pivoting towards clientele like that. When it comes to buyers of real estate, making more of a focus on areas that have a lot more transactions. So Alberta, I can transact all across most provinces in Canada. So I had a client in Alberta today who wants to buy an investment property, right? So seeing where there's demand. Yeah. So you sort of have to be flexible with the clientele and where transactions are happening.
Oh, that's amazing. Here, I'm going to put you on the spot again. You talk about Alberta, right?
Right.
What are the prime places to invest? Let's say outside of Ontario right now.
Yeah. So
outside the GTA, actually, because let's do outside the GTA.
Yeah,
I want to hear some spaces.
Thoughts about the GTA?
Or outside the GTA. Or because I know you went to invested in Windsor.
Okay.
So
how about this? Best places to invest in Ontario.
And outside.
It's such a broad question. It's like, what strategy are you doing? If you're talking about like condos, GTA doesn't make sense. If you're talking about single family home, multifamilies, GTA doesn't make sense. If you're talking about development, GTA can start to make sense, right? But for generally, like if you're talking about buy and hold, let's say like very simple, I want to buy a property, rent it out, it needs to be cash flow positive. In Ontario, you're really looking at tertiary markets to be able to be cash flow positive. Windsor, Sudbury, Cornwall. Not a lot of people want to invest in those areas because these are like starting to get a little bit out there, right? And the fundamentals can be a little bit shaky. If you're willing to broaden your spectrum into other provinces, I've been looking at Edmonton. I've been looking at Saskatoon. I've been looking at Winnipeg, believe it or not. I mean, to put things in perspective, people are so sort of tied into their bubble. Like Winnipeg has a population of over 800,000 people, right? Most people don't even know that. Yeah. It is I think last year it had like 5% population growth. Like everywhere had pretty substantial population growth, but it was one of the top 5 cities with population growth as well. In terms of employment, it's quite diversified. Like people think Winnipeg, they're like, oh, is it agriculture? Is it like commodities? No, that's actually... That's more Calgary. Calgary's like very heavily into like commodities, and Saskatoon and Regina are very heavy into commodities. Winnipeg is actually pretty well diversified, and as a result of that, like its appreciation has always been steady. If you look at the past like 2 decades, it's appreciated 2 to 3% a year on average. It's not like a boom bust, but people have like preconceived notions. I like Winnipeg right now because your average home, I think the benchmark MLS home price there is about $350,000 for houses. Whereas like in Ontario, if I want to buy a house for $350,000, I got to go to Sudbury. Like, would I rather do Sudbury, which population size is still about, I think it was like a greater Sudbury area. I think it's like 150,000, something along those lines. I might be a little bit off. Or would I rather invest in Winnipeg for the same price, but it's an actual legitimate major metro city, and its population's 800,000, right? Like I'd lean towards there. So those areas, like again, like what I would be looking at is like where's the most population growth, right? Where is there the most investment? Where's the most development? Edmonton comes to mind as well. Calgary is still pretty good in my opinion, but I think the money is funneling out of Ontario because Ontario has become so not landlord friendly, right? There's still money to be made in Ontario. Will still invest in Ontario, but there's very elevated risks. I've dealt with so many I dealt with the fair share of non-payment of rents, right? Yeah. Where it's like you have one non-payment of rent and your cash flowing property starts taking money out of your pocket, right? So you got to be wary of these things as well when choosing the market.
Have you, because I know some people, they even invest all the way in the States. Have you thought about doing that? Like,
yeah.
Buffalo was a good market, I think.
A lot of my sort of peers and counterparts have been funneling the money to the U.S. It's just much more open to capital investment than Canada is. And it's easier for growth. Financing is much easier. Personally, I have not yet. I've considered it. I haven't dug too deep into it. I see the appeal of it. The landlord friendliness, again, like the financing cap. There's no cap in financing. Like U.S. economy over Canadian economy all day long as well, right? But Canada for me is just like less hurdles, if that makes sense, because it's easy. Like I understand the mortgage game here already. I understand the investing game here already. Like going to the States, it's a little bit of laziness. Like I'm going to have to do research from scratch again. Like for here,
Yeah.
it's pretty autopilot. I can sort of figure out what market I want to invest in, systemize, build a team. In the States, again, whole different ballpark, right? I'm open to it, but not, again, it's going to take a lot of effort.
For sure. So speaking of landlord friendliness,
Mm-hmm.
one thing I've noticed with our previous guests, we've had like Jelani, who was a real estate agent, a very successful one. We had Wei Ting, who actually went on your podcast as well, and she's building Open Room. One thing I've noticed from our audience engagement is they're always like, when it comes to the landlord struggles, they're always like, fuck the landlords.
Yeah.
Fuck the landlords. They deserve this.
Right.
But landlords are people as well, and they go through struggles as well. What do you have to say about that?
I can see the sentiment of that, right? Like, it comes down, and I can sympathize, and I could agree to some extent. It comes down to like the monetization of housing, right? Which is obviously a big issue. I think there's like if you're doing, it's not like if you're doing development, if you're doing multifamily, like these are not home buyer products to begin with. It's a little bit of a different story, right? Like these are rental products. If you're buying like condos and things of that nature, I understand the struggle around that, right? Like it's like, oh, like it makes it unaffordable. But I think it's also a little bit of blaming the landlords, right? Like I don't want to get political, but ultimately it's a government-induced problem, right? It's not easy to build in Toronto. Hence, like people don't build in Toronto because of how expensive, how difficult, how much red tape there is. Like it takes a year to get like permits. It could take longer than that. You have to rezone certain properties if you want to build like high rise. It's crazy. It is very challenging to build in Toronto, right? Very risky. And just in Ontario in general. And so you get like the supply side gets sort of tightened, right? And on the demand side, it's like the mass immigration, right? Like what is leading to housing prices climbing? Yes, investors could be one aspect. I'm not going to ignore that. I think the bigger picture is the supply and demand is being driven by the government, and the supply is being constrained by the government as well, right? But I could sympathize that the mentality is to F landlords, right? Because it just feels like housing is a financialization. Like you're there to, profit off of it. So, yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I think what I was saying to that is basically that my parents are landlords,
Right?
And they're in no way at that level wealthy or
Right.
affluent. They're just trying to build their assets, like a lot of us
Right.
here are. And I think that's the story of a lot of landlords, like especially when it comes to the interest rates environment that we are in right now.
Yeah.
A lot of landlords are in a lot of stress.
Yeah, they're not rich. I think people think they're
they're
rich.
not
No.
rich. They're not trying to mooch off of their tenants, but it's part of the economy. And
Yeah, I will say this. I agree with you. With a lot of the sentiment is that it depends on what people say by F landlord. Some people can be logical with it, where they're like, if they, the arguments that said the financialization of housing. So if you say that, like that'd be like, okay, I understand your perspective, right? But some people are just like, landlords are rich, all of that, and like those are total misconceptions, right?
Yep.
Like most mom and pop landlords, this is their sort of like retirement plan, right? Like if anything happens to the house, if they get non-payment of rent, they're working a full-time job, right? And this house is not really, like equity is not cash. If something happens and they come to a liquidity crisis where they can't afford like a new roof, so on and so forth, then the house becomes in disrepair because they can't afford it. They have to become forced sellers, and they don't walk away with a lot of money. I think people sort of neglect the risk that gets involved there.
absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, there's two sides to every story.
For sure. So obviously that led you to try and invest elsewhere outside of Ontario.
Right.
So for people who are, let's say, looking at investing in faraway places, how do you go about managing those properties? Are you like flying in all the time, or
Right.
do you hire someone, outsource that kind of?
Yeah. It's it comes down to building the right quote unquote power teams, and that is having the right people in place to take care of the property so you don't need to be there. So if you have, there's a couple people in your power team. The first one is the realtor, right? That's like deal flow. That's people who are boots on the ground that take the videos of the property for you. a home inspector. Realistically, none of us are home inspectors. A home inspector will catch things that we won't be able to see. A contractor, right? Again, we're not contractors, so a contractor will know more about the property than we will, but you got to make sure it's a reliable and ethical contractor, because you could also get screwed over by one. So having those three individuals, just a general, like either a buddy, boots on the ground person, someone that you can rely on. Those three people, obviously, they have financial interest in the property, like either whether that be doing renovations or selling you a property. Having someone neutral, that could be another real estate investor who's local to that area, that you can just say, hey, I'm going to pay you $50. I need you to just check up on the property for an hour, right? And make sure that the work is actually being done before I give the money to the contractor or whatever the case is, right? So someone boots on the ground that you can trust, that you can rely on for either advice or to check up on the property. And then your lawyer, your accountant, but those can be anywhere. And your property management, right? That's important. They take care of the day-to-day stress of the property to look out for your best interest. If you have those individuals in place, you don't necessarily need to be in the property. Nowadays, when I have a deal, someone's like, hey, Austin, there's an opportunity. My first step is like, okay, realtor, pull me all of the comparables. I have the comparables. I'll analyze the deals, right? Second step, contractor, can you walk through the property, right? Home inspector, can you go to the property to make sure that the contractor didn't miss anything? Or like quote these things out, right? Get 2 or 3 different quotes. And then I plug that in my spreadsheet, run the numbers. Hopefully it makes sense, right? Property manager, what do you think rents are going to go for? Plug in the rents in my spreadsheet. Go on Facebook Marketplace, make sure the rents align with Facebook Marketplace, right? And then investor, hey, is this a good area? Is this a bad area? This is what the people in my power team are telling me. Like, what do you think, right? They give me some honest advice. I can pay them $100 for an hour of coaching just to make sure that, you know, it's cost of doing business. All of it checks out, perfect. Then we can get going. You get video updates, right? I can get my property. I can pay my property manager $50 to just check up on the property to make sure the contractor is actually doing the shit that they said they're going to do. And then contractor's like, hey, work is done. Perfect. Here's the scope of work that you gave me, that you told me you were going to do. Property manager, here's the scope of work. Make sure every one of these things were done. Is there any deficiencies you noticed, right? Test everything. Yeah. Give my property manager $50 to do all of that. And it's like, hey, contractor, property manager checked it out. Here are the things you still need to do. I'm not releasing your money or the remainder of your payment until these things are done. And then that's it, right? You don't need to be, it'd be nice to be down there when you meet these individuals, right? Because it's good to build rapport. And I do tend to travel down there my first time to meet everyone and build rapport and put like a, you know, face to my name. But then after that, I find that I don't need to be there as often. But I think people tend to overcomplicate that aspect of things.
So how do you find people in the power team? You mentioned the first time when you fly or go there. Is that when you meet them?
Yeah. How do you find like the right people what you're, okay. So every major city should have a real estate investment group for the most part, right? So if I, like, when I was looking at Winnipeg, first thing I did is I went on Facebook and searched for Winnipeg real estate investors, right? And then I try to connect with investors there. I try to connect with other investors who are investing in that local area because they probably already have a power team set up. I just jump on calls with them. Some of them are paid coaching calls. Some of them will give their time for free. I'll just pick their brain about like, and then I'll ask them like, which realtors do you recommend? You got a list of like 4 or 5 realtors. You call them, you interview them, figure out which one you want to go with. You also ask the investor which property managers to recommend. Same thing. You can interview the property managers. You can ask them which contractors they recommend. Most investors won't disclose their contractor because you want it. That's like the secret sauce, right? Yeah. Contractor gets a lot of work, then they start neglecting your projects. Right. So now you have the realtors, now you have the property managers. You start interviewing them, and then you ask the realtor. Most good realtors also have power teams, right? I would want to work with the realtor that if I go to, hey, realtor, I'm buying an investment property. Do you have a contractor around the area, right? And they'd be like, yeah, try this person. So of those 3 or 4 realtors, you ask them for recommendations, again, on contractors. You ask them on recommendations on property managers. So you start building the list more and more, so there's more people to interview. Contact the property manager, start interviewing them. And most property managers, they're doing repairs here and there. It's like, do you have any handymen? Do you have any electricians, plumbers, whatever that I can speak to? And you start narrowing. It's just a referral business. Right. But it all starts by finding that community, right? And finding those investors to speak to. And then it spawns out into referrals. And then you sort of pick and choose who's going to be core members of your power team from there.
All right. I mean, we could talk about real estate all day with you. I feel like
To be honest, I probably want to as well. I've been educated this episode. Holy.
I mean, I wish we were doing like a Joe Rogan style 3-hour episode on just real estate, because there's just so much to learn. But you're also a podcaster,
Right.
And us being on a podcast, I feel like we could also learn a lot on that realm, because you guys are what, like 100 and something episodes in?
I don't even. Yeah, we're probably like at least. You could probably check. I have no idea.
I think
How
they're
many
probably
episodes
closer to
we're
the
in.
200 mark than they are to the 100.
Maybe, yeah.
Basically, a lot of episodes in.
Mm-hmm.
We always use the statistic that most podcasts fail or don't go past 21 episodes. So
Right.
You're way past that. We're trying to still get to that. I think next episode will be our 21st.
Yeah.
Nice.
But just talk about that. What led to you starting the podcast, and
Right.
what led to you still going on with it? Because it's been like 4 years now.
Yeah, we were chatting about this offline. Like podcasting, for most people in our stage, like if you're Joe Rogan and shit, there's money to be made, right? But for most people our stage, it's a loss leader. Like you're not really gonna make any significant amount of money in podcasting. And if you do make money, you're gonna probably hire people so that you can be less hands off, right? For me, it was strictly a branding play. Right, like what can I do to build brand? What could I do to build credibility? At that time, I wasn't a mortgage agent, right? I had nothing to sell. But one, it's a couple of reasons. One is that like I'll build my brand, so when I do have some sort of avenue where I have a product or service that I want the audience to engage in, it's an easier sell, right? Because at the beginning when I started it off, not selling anything. Secondly, it's a cool way for me to connect with other people. And that's a big reason why you guys are starting. We wouldn't have met if it wasn't for this podcast,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So like for me, it's niched into real estate investing, and there's so many different strategies on investing.
To tell people the name, it's Rise Real Estate Investing Podcast.
Right.
If anyone wants to check it out.
Yeah. So it really was one of those two reasons, and both of those two reasons, and it was organic. Like I didn't start it expecting it to blow up or anything like that, right? Like it doesn't need to be the biggest podcast for me to speak to my core audience. I just wanted to make sure that my core audience would engage and enjoy it, and slowly it would grow over time. And what made it more manageable, I guess like maybe most people don't get, I don't know like if this is true, if we did not hire the right people to edit, to reach out to guests for us, to help us with our captions, our reels, et cetera, we probably would have gave up pretty quickly as well. You guys know, it's very time consuming.
Oh yeah.
Once we started hiring those people, then after that, it became a lot more fun, because all I had to do was jump on, meet the guests, build a new connection, and then that's it. Right? The rest of the part isn't fun. It's just the meeting and speaking with people that's engaging. But our podcast now has I think it's close to 300,000 downloads.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and a lot of it was just organic growth, word of mouth, sharing it with other friends, families. And then we also host an event. So alongside with the Rise Real Estate Investing Podcast, we have the Rise Network, which is a free Facebook community. I think it has like 7,300 or 7,400 members now. So they go hand in hand and sort of complement each other, right? So we host networking events as well, where real estate investors can connect. So it's really building a community of like a core audience where we can all add value and engage with each other and like inspire each other in a real estate investing journey. But it started off with just a small vision. It's like, let's just shoot the shit and see where this goes. And then over time, it started growing to be something bigger than that.
That was great insight. You talk about branding, and I think that's, it's such a key thing when it comes to content creation on social media.
Mm-hmm.
But with so many real estate investing gurus or want to be gurus on social media, how do you differentiate yourself with that brand?
I think people can smell authenticity, right? My posts on social media that get the most engagement is when I post a loss, right? And that comes with comments, likes, reshares, everything. Right? Like, I guess negative news sells, but it also shows that you're showing the goods and the bads, which is why in this podcast, we talked more about my losses than my wins. I like talking about that stuff because this is the reality of investing. It's not smooth. So if you're going to go about branding, at least in real estate, I can't speak, I'm not like a marketing expert by any means. From my own personal experience, it's the authenticity. It's showing that you're going out, putting the reps, you're showing your wins, you're showing your losses, you're showing your struggles,
and you're engaging with your audience as well. Like I have sort of strayed away from doing this. I want to get back into it, but I find that when I go on social media and I say, hey, like I'm going to take the next hour to answer any of your questions in my stories, it's like, ask me a question. And people ask me questions and I just respond to it on my story, right? Like showing like genuine engagement and adding as much value. Again, like when you build a brand, when you build an audience, you want to be connected with them. And I feel like that's the best way to go.
Absolutely. Well, what came first, your podcast or the community, the Rise Network?
The community came first. Our first meetup was pretty good. We had 20 people.
Yeah.
Then the second meetup, we had like 5 people. And I was like, oh, fuck, what did I do wrong? Like, why are people like showing up again? And it was very stagnant with not many people showing up. And and then it started like word of mouth and it started going 40, 50 people. Like this was just all organic. I did it, people go in, it's like, oh, I want this to be the biggest group ever. When you do that, you set yourself up for letting yourself down. So I just did this out of just like engaging and connecting with cool people. What started blowing it up, it was already growing, but what blew it up is when I got featured on Toronto Life.
Yeah.
And
that article.
We're talking about branding, right? Like they did not reach out to me. What I did is I was like, how could I continuously elevate my brand? I wrote like a quick 1-paragraph article on myself and sent it off to the Globe and Mail, to Toronto Life, to Toronto Star. Like all of these publications have like either a real estate section or they have a section where they talk about someone's story. Like very Toronto Life made the most sense because they like to reflect people's story a lot on the article.
Yeah.
But I found the author of whoever writes those articles and I look at other articles that they published. And if it's a similar sort of vein of like, I think my sort of story can fit within their niche. I think most of the time their emails are either, I believe I was finding the email through there. Most of the time it's available. And I would email all of them. I'd be like, hey, this is my story. Like, do you want to interview me? Right? Toronto Life got back to me. Toronto Star got back to me as well. Toronto Star ended up flopping on the interview because COVID came and they're just like, we're not doing any other articles. But yeah, like you got to put yourself out there, right? Like things don't come to you. You have to sort of go out and put an effort to try to brand yourself.
That's actually crazy though, because I thought it was the other way around.
No.
Yeah.
No. People go, sometimes they reach out to you. I've heard those cases, but dude, like how you can't control your destiny if you're waiting for someone to reach out. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, you basically reached out to us too, and
yes,
we were, and I guess that's like the biggest lesson in branding is what you talked about. Like you got to put yourself out there,
right?
And unless you do that, like we would have never found out about you.
Mm-hmm.
We would have, we probably wouldn't have met you, not yet at least. But I'm so glad that you did, and you're here right now. So really thankful for that. Man, I wish we could keep going forever on this, just because you're just so knowledgeable and there's just so much to learn from you. But I want to ask you one more thing. If you were to give advice to someone who's coming up, let's say maybe in a similar shoe that you were in back in the day, and they're trying to look into maybe real estate investing or maybe just personal wealth in general, what's a piece of advice that you would give them?
Yeah. Okay. So 2 pieces of advice. First thing is that I've learned this from my mentor when I was in real estate investing. He retired at 24, and now he's like probably 29. He's worth like 10 mil or something like that. Like what he taught me is he's super frugal. So he says the key to maximize wealth and to get financial independence, the quickest way, there's 3 things. The first one is you want to minimize your spending. You want to be frugal. You don't want to overspend. Right? The second thing is you want to earn more income. And the third thing is you want to invest and maximize your returns in that order. The reason why you want to do that order is that the thing that you have the absolute most control of today, everyone can get started tomorrow, is saving more money, spending less, right? And for a lot of us, we buy a lot of things that we don't necessarily need, and as we make more money, we spend more. Then you're sort of caught in that loop. You're never going to get ahead doing that, right? So be conscious of saving more money. Secondly, the second easiest thing to control is earning more money, right? Saving you can do tomorrow. Earning more money takes a little bit of time. You got to find a side business. You have to switch jobs, switch career paths, and that way you can earn more money. The difference between the two is the money that you save, right? You want to increase the money that you save. And the last key is that money that you save, you want to invest. and you want to maximize the returns. That's by far the hardest thing. For a lot of people, especially in stocks, you don't have much control of the outcome, right? There's different investment vehicles, and investing is risky. Any sort of vehicle, there's an element of risk in investing. So that's the hardest thing to control. But you want to try to find an investment vehicle you're comfortable with and earn the most amount of returns in. So it goes in those three orders. But most people try to either earn more or they try to invest without even trying to save. You're going about it the wrong way, right? So that's
Guilty.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
well.
I'm like, do I put up my hand or what?
Yeah. And I think that's most people, to be fair. That was me as well. So that's one advice. The second advice, if you're trying to get into real estate investing, I could already imagine biggest problem is going to be money for most people and probably qualification. You don't have to invest in your backyard. You will have to buy in a place that you can afford. And whether that be 3 hours away, drive till you qualify is the saying, right? Whether that be 3 hours away, 4 hours away in another province, right? Whatever it is, you have to start building you don't have to, but my recommendation is to start building your investment portfolio. Don't try to save your way to get into the housing market if you're in Toronto, right? Like for me, the only reason I was able to afford a property in Toronto is because I built my portfolio in Windsor. I sold a couple properties, then I threw that in buying a property in Toronto, right? I grew my wealth elsewhere because you don't have to grow your wealth in your backyard. Find a place you can afford that's cash flow positive, that you have down payment for, right? Could be Saskatoon, could be Winnipeg, etc. Grow a portfolio there, exit, and then you can buy your house here, right? But that would be my advice.
Sure. I mean, you've definitely inspired me to look into Winnipeg for investing.
This is not financial advice, by the way.
Not financial advice. It's just this on3 pod. We're just three guys shooting the shit. But yeah, and I mean, you've also given people a lot of advice on how to manage those properties if anyone was to go down the road. So really thankful for that. A lot of great tips here. Anything else from you?
No, I just want to reiterate. Thank you, Austin. Like, genuinely, that was, I just learned a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. This was a good interview. You guys asked some pretty great questions.
Yeah, and
I mean, you because we have a great guest. I mean,
I know. I was just gonna say that's half the equation, but I wish we could talk longer. Hey, maybe there's a part 2 to this. But thank you for today, and
and before we sign off, is there anything else you would like to relay to our audience or plug?
Let's see, shameless plug time. Okay, I can shameless plug a couple things.
Go ahead, plug for us.
Follow me on Instagram at Austin Yeh 6 for real estate content, branding. If you guys need mortgage or financing, you can reach out to me. I'm a mortgage agent. And if you guys are into real estate, we have a free community, Rise Network. Doesn't cost anything. We don't make money. We actually lose money on it. So just join, and there's a ton of free real estate knowledge on there.
That's amazing.
That's awesome. And check out the podcast as well. Check out, we're going to link all your pages on our show notes. So thank you again for coming down. I know you traveled quite a bit within rush hour to get here. So we are very thankful for that. And with that, signing off, myself, Salvi again, my co-host Naveed, and our great guest for today, Austin Yeh. We out.